Well, hello everybody. Welcome to episode 3 of Business Jam Live. Just a quick bit of housekeeping for the people out there. We like you all to have comments or ask questions. But for those of you who are actually watching using Facebook, can I just ask you to do this for me, please? Go to this URL. And what it means is that if you do comment or ask a question, instead of saying Facebook user, it will come up and actually say your name, which is a lot more friendly. Anyone else on YouTube or LinkedIn, just use the comments as you normally would. So let's hide that. Well, what a great show we have today. I think it's just about time to introduce the guest and stop listening to me, I think. So our guest today, Tim. Tim is founder of GingrTech, developers of world-class simulations, as he says, using the latest science. We'll test him on that, I think, to enable organizations to tackle big problems like sustainability, whole system thinking, and de-siloing without the need for expensive consultants. I'm not actually sure that I like the sound of that because I am an expensive consultant, but we'll find out more in a minute. So, welcome, Tim.
Hello.
Welcome to our cozy little show here. So, how did you get to where you are today, doing what you're doing?
Well, I was listening to your intro there, Derek, and well, first of all, thanks very much for having me on board today. It's great to be with you. So I used to be an expensive consultant myself, and actually was getting quite frustrated that working with organizations throughout the best part of my life, trying to get them to change and to transform and get them to think about the world slightly differently. And it was really as a result of that I picked up a book by an American marketeer called Douglas Van Praet. I'm a biochemist from university, but Douglas pulled together all this neuroscience of what motivates people. And whilst I was going in and doing consultancy and earning lots of money, what I was doing was incredibly slow. It just takes a long time to get people to change. And what I loved about Douglas's book was that in that book, it said something very simple, which we probably all know, which is very simple, which is the only way you can get someone to believe in an idea is to get them to believe it was their own idea in the first place. And so if you go about consulting, or if you go about getting people to come up with the ideas for themselves, then they change far more rapidly. And so I embarked on seeing how we could use technology to accelerate that process. So create an environment where people are coming up with all the really good ideas to improve businesses for themselves, rather than just sticking them in front of a PowerPoint, which is the title of today's talk.
So, we're not actually killing off PowerPoint. We're just saying that it'll die out of its own accord.
Well, I think it's a really interesting question. I mean, let me ask you, Derek, when did you learn to ride a bike?
I hate to think, to be honest. A long time ago.
Okay. But if I gave you a bike right now, would you be able to ride it?
Probably.
Yeah. I think I would as well. I'm not a regular cyclist, I have to say, but the point is that we learned something many, many years ago that we still vividly remember, and actually it's kind of embedded in what we do. But let me ask you a different question, Derek. When was the last time you attended a PowerPoint training session?
Again, a while ago. Although having said that, it could be said that these days one attends them piecemeal.
Yeah,
I don't think these. I think people are more likely. I hate to say this, they're more likely to sit and watch a YouTube video these days, aren't they?
Yeah,
and learning bits and pieces.
But it's still kind of quite two-dimensional. It's still instructor-led with slides.
Yes.
And the truth of the matter is, Derek, is that you probably can't remember what was inside the content. And there's a lot of science that supports that. So Ebbinghaus, for example, has done these things called forgetful curves. You can look it up online. And it shows that using traditional training techniques, like PowerPoint or attending a classroom with an instructor, after 30 days, you're retaining about 20% of what you learned on day naught. So, whilst I think PowerPoint's been a revelation and a wonderful piece of kit, all the Microsoft suite, although whether it's all Microsoft originated, but is a question. But I think all of those tools are wonderful, but they're not necessarily all that effective. And I think that's what I'm just trying to drive at, is that there are a lot more memorable, more sticky ways of getting people to understand, transform, learn, accelerate their changes, change their habits based on newer technologies that are available today in what my field is, which is business simulations.
I thought just crossed my mind, and it was going back to PowerPoint. A lot of people believe that the PowerPoint is the presentation. They believe it to be the presentation rather than the delivery method to deliver the message that's supposed to be there. So
Yeah.
how do you with the sorts of things that you're working on or you're talking about, how do you actually get rid of that differentiation? Because you just surely we just want them to buy into the whole thing.
Yeah, so I suppose that's the complicated nature of what I do, which is we work on a basis of group learning, which again, there's lots of science that supports that group learning is very, very much more powerful in terms of how the speed at which we can understand complexity improves when we're learning as a group. So not only the speed at which we can solve problems and complexity and understand complexity, but actually the difficulty of the complexity, and also just the sheer load of complexity all goes up as if we're working as a group. So what I do is so with our business simulations, and they've got to be disambiguated away from things that might have been you might have done at university, which might have been a sort of algorithmic sort of spreadsheet or something like that. This is a very sort of in-depth environment, or immersive environment, I think is a good way to describe it, where 12 people have to run and optimize a business together. Now, the complex bit of what we do is trying to anticipate what 12 people are doing at any given time and making sure that they come to the conclusion. So we're feeding, if you like, into this group of people. And I like to think about it like layers of an onion, is sort of ever increasing difficulty of complexities that they have to solve on the fly, but under the duress of time as well. So we give them a business, which is an operating business, which they have to trade. And we do that we give them 26 weeks worth of trade, but except that happens in 26 minutes. So it's all pretty intense, but it's lots of fun because it's gaming. And, as I always say in these things, no animals and children get hurt. And so what we're doing is we're bringing together these individuals to learn for themselves, because after the sort of initial sort of 20 minutes of instruction at the beginning of the day is, that this is what you're going to be doing today. Anyone that comes up and asks a question of one of our facilitators, like, how do we do this? The answer is, I don't know. It's your business. Go and figure it out for yourself. These are not, this is not instructional, because that old adage, which is telling isn't selling, it's so important. It's so true. Let's stop trying to tell people how to run businesses. Let's give them a business that they can break and make mistakes in. And that's the beauty of a simulated environment.
Yeah, so I must admit, I remember doing. I mean, the tools like you're using haven't been around that long, but I can remember, back about the year 2000, doing something very similar in its, shall we say, intent with the Open University. Went to residential school, and part of that was over the 4 or 5 days in a team. You ran a business. The only problem was you made decisions and then it was fed into a computer, and you didn't get the decisions till the next morning. But yes, that was you. You all had businesses. You all tried to influence the marketplace, do all the nefarious things like slashing your prices and dumping stuff. It was quite good. You could do all this stuff, but I am surprised that not many more people, as long ago as that, were doing it. And I suppose we get back to the expensive consultant again. Everybody was believing the expensive consultant rather than, I mean, as I tend to say when I'm talking to businesses, a lot of the time the answers are within. You just have to find them. And your tool is obviously a brilliant discovery tool.
That's exactly it. I mean, we used to have a tagline. We've changed it now, but not because of any particular reason. But I always used to say, look, what we do is we unleash the latent potential within. We've inherited a world where this post-industrialized world where we have very rigid hierarchies and expectations of how we should operate within organizations. It's so interesting. I have to bring people into my organizations and deprogram them and say, no, just go and be humans. But they have this perception that they have to be somehow this very formal entity when they're speaking to another client or one of our clients. I'm saying, no, we just deal with humans, and so be friendly, be nice, and so on. But in this post-industrial revolution, we've still got this hierarchical thing. But it goes right back to schools. We are trained to do things on the blow of a whistle or a ring of a bell. And society needs worker bees. And so we all have this expectation of hierarchy and how we should operate and how we should behave. And the truth of the matter is, in actual fact, businesses need people to break the rules and get to the end destinations faster. And the only way that you can do that is by giving people permission to do that. And that doesn't mean it doesn't mean that people should do it in an uncontrolled way. As long as people understand the generalized purpose and also the values of the organization, then you can accelerate very quickly by enabling the staff and the members of the team to operate the business without so much micromanaging and sort of oversight, for want of a better word.
I was going to say, here's a good question for you.
Go ahead.
You've probably well, he's a great hero of mine. You've probably come across Sir Ken Robinson in your time.
Mm-hmm.
And he, as many hopefully people listening will realize it was attributed to him, was the fact that he called for this great, I suppose, reorganization, or I suppose that's a good way of putting it, of schools, because we're all incredibly creative up until about the age of 4 or 5.
Yeah.
We go and play knights and cowboys, and we have used cardboard boxes and sticks and things, and we're quite happy, and all these things are real. And then we go to school and
they're all taken away.
Say, yeah, you've got to start learning to pass exams. You've got to learn to pass your tests. And that's gradually whittled away through primary school, and then through secondary school, even more so. And then when these people leave and maybe they go to college, maybe they go into the workplace, and that's where you pick them up. I don't know.
Yeah,
but they used to being. They haven't. What they haven't got, and I think the gaming side provides such a lot here. They don't know how to learn for themselves.
Yeah, I agree.
We shouldn't be teaching them how to pass exams. We should be teaching them how to learn so that they can learn to pass exams. And then when they've left school, they can learn to do something else as well.
Well, I think I'm going to sort of, I was agreeing with you nearly all the way there, but then just stopped at that they shouldn't be doing exams. The evidence is overwhelming that doing exams is an extremely poor way of measuring people. So um, and don't get me started on metrics, because that's another kettle of fish altogether. But again, even our own UK government's report shows that 70% of the metric-based programs are not working, and principally that's because the metrics are just creating the unintended consequences. And you can see that everywhere in everyday society, is that metrics, uses of measurements then get converted into targets, and they have really poor results for organizations. And if you go and look at schools, we've got this wonderful thing now where, so I'll give you an example. There's some friends of ours that moved houses to a different part just outside Edinburgh to go to a very well respected school. Got out there and found out that the school was extremely average, but because there was the parents were all slightly better well off than others, they were all paying for private tutors, and so the result of that is the school was doing a lot better than other schools in different catchment areas but the only difference was the use of tutors. Now, how does a league table differentiate that? It doesn't, and it's really poor. And how do we differentiate someone who does pretty average at school, but in actual fact is very good at a number of different things, which might include softer skills as well? It's extremely difficult to differentiate. And actually, I found myself on that doing at school, being sort of very sort of good at a lot of things rather than very good at a few things. But we seem to celebrate those people that are very good at a few things, rather than more generally.
Yeah, it's a bit
broken.
It is. It's also a physical almost a physical manifestation of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. If you step in to measure a system, you're going to change the system that you're going to measure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, just by inspecting it.
And the other problem is, well, here in Sheffield, we see it a lot. These league tables are used in so many ways to decide where there are areas of deprivation, and it has knock-on effects to funding all over the UK, whether it's healthcare or education, whatever. So yeah, bad.
No, it's pretty extraordinary, and certainly. So there was some wonderful research that Dan Pink summarized from MIT, and if you're not familiar with it, then it's well worth spending the 8 or 9 minutes watching the video, which is where MIT did this investigation into what motivates people, and the general feeling was that, look, if you pay somebody more, they perform better. And so they did this test, and they found that in purely non-intellectual based exercises, that you can pay people more and more, and up into the physical limits of a human being, they will do more and more within their time, based on increased wages. But the moment you introduce a bit of intellectual expertise required within the job, then the results go a bit crazy. The more you pay, the less the performance. And so MIT thought, they did this in America. So MIT thought, hey, we're in a first world country, we're a special case, this is going to be just different. So they went off, I think, to India or Pakistan. It was one of the Asian countries anyway, and did exactly the same experiment, and discovered that exactly the same results happen the moment you include an element of intellectual requirement. So what they discovered is that the moment you get above Maslow's hierarchies of needs of sort of dealing with food, shelter, and safety and security, then the money problem is off the table. It's actually from there on in about self-actualization, mastery, values, feeling part of the team, and so on. The more sort of intrinsic values rather than extrinsic ones. And I think it's really fascinating that when you go and look at that, you then say, well, okay, well then on that basis, then, well, we've got we pay people sales commissions, or traders on a trading floor. We pay them commissions and we give them targets to achieve. And then we wonder why they cut corners when we're still demanding that they achieve their targets and these commissions. And it's extraordinary. The whole financial crisis 10 years ago was on the basis that the guys on the trading floor ran out of things to trade. So they started creating things. And this is a classic example of using metrics to control organizations. You get very, very odd results sometimes, and very immoral results, which one has to be quite careful about.
I don't know why, but just then I started thinking about equity theory and all the things around that, and started turning towards this whole business now about people working from home, working in the office, in particular the thousands and thousands of civil servants. Does any of this thinking explain the bizarre behaviours, particularly of the civil servants, who are, some of whom probably aren't paid huge amounts of money, some of whom are in intellectual types of jobs, and some of whom aren't? But how on earth can we get them? I don't know. I mean, maybe it's a good idea for them to all go back to the office, but productivity clearly isn't what it used to be. So what's actually going? I mean, we've had, was it 50-odd thousand HGV applications at the DVLA, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
So what's going on there? Or what? In fact, what has COVID done?
Well, I think, in the words of Father Ted, that'll be an ecumenical matter. But
possibly.
So quite big questions there. But let me pick off one of them, at least to start with, which is productivity. So I think that productivity is a very misunderstood expression that is bandied around by people. And it's it kind of covers a bunch of evils, but it's a macroeconomic term, and a macroeconomic term that just cannot be used for a business. And if you're interested in this, you can go and read Harvard Business Review's attempt, where one organization hired a very, very expensive mathematician to come in and actually try and measure productivity, and how it failed. The trouble is that on a microcosmic scale, on a single use case basis, you can't. There are too many variables to be able to measure effectively what productivity is, and effectively that it's the ability to based on inputs, the quality of the outputs and the money generated and so on and so forth. But there are all sorts of problems at all sorts of levels with measuring productivity, and that's a different podcast in itself, which I've done a lot of work on in the past. But suffice it to say, I think the productivity issue across the United Kingdom and Western economies, which has largely been flatlining over the last 15, 20 years, or rather not growing as much as we had previously experienced in the back half of the 20th century, 21st century, I should say, is wide-ranging, and I think it's really got economists scratching their heads because they don't really understand what it is. I think the answer is there are. And this is supposition on my part. I'm not going to make any claims towards it. But I think a lot of things is trying to actually de-brain our organization. So by trying to automate humans and make them do more and more from an automation point of view, process automate a very fixed process way of thinking, so it takes out the ability for brains within the organization to actually innovate and to find shortcuts and to do that. And I think that in this age of more IT, which does help productivity, it also stifles it as well, because it makes sure that human beings have to go down particular tracks, particular routes to achieve pieces of work. And I think that as a result of that, we've actually got this situation, there's this unhappy situation where humans are being required not to innovate. And as a result of that, they're getting less motivated in the workplace, and that also causes lower productivity problems. So you're less inclined to want to try and solve complexities and interesting problems within the workplace. It's a fairly vicious circle, I think.
There's an interesting problem there. Scott, who was on episode 1 of this, we were talking about this, and also one of his guests, a guy called Mike Hobday, he's into artificial intelligence, and we were talking about what was going to happen in the workplace, and the feeling is that the AI is not really going to take over in every sense, but what it will do is do a lot of the grunt work, the things that, say, a legal secretary might have to do. AI could sort all that out, but there is, as you say, a space for brains. If all the really mundane work is taken away, then that leaves a phenomenal amount of space, time, resources for people to innovate. So the question is, why aren't they? Or is it that they can't or won't? Or, as I like to beat company bosses around the head, it's not necessarily always their fault that they aren't letting their people do it. What's actually happening, or is it a bit of both?
I think it's a bit of everything, actually. So I think we think that we think that efficient businesses are run on set processes, which is the kind of franchise model, that franchise dream of everyone having a McDonald's type business, which is fully franchised. Wonderful book, The Ep03 Revisited. If you haven't read it, read it, because it's a lovely book to get some ideas from. But written a long time ago, and I think that, so I think processes, while strict, are really good if you've got an organization like that. But most of the, certainly in the UK, most of the businesses that I'm aware of, and you've got to remember that something like is it 97% of all businesses in the UK are SMEs, contributing about 51% of the GDP to the United Kingdom. All of these businesses pretty much aren't processable, if that makes sense, because they're just too small. They don't have that scale, and most people are trying to do they all suffer pretty much, and this goes right to the core of productivity. They suffer from a thing called yes syndrome, because they can't say no to clients. So they just keep saying yes, and they end up going into R&D cycles over and over and over again to redevelop their products, rather than trying to settle down on doing a few really well. So there's that problem. I think there's the management not being able to let go. I think there's a huge amount of very, very poor science in the business world about how organizations should be run and should not be run. And I think there's an awful lot of cultural changes that are happening, particularly at the moment, in terms of how society works, which is adding to the confusion as well. I think it's I think it's difficult to solve that productivity problem, or indeed put your finger on any particular one aspect of it, Derek.
It's interesting that you mentioned the lack of science in the business world, which is I was having a sit-down argument, not a stand-up argument, with somebody from one of our 2 universities here in Sheffield, and I have this big problem with academia generally, in that what they don't seem to want to do is that the universities like to make money by selling their services to business. What they're less keen on is the sort of knowledge transfer from university to business, or business to university, or to keep going backwards and forwards. And I think that's that would be a very, very good way of getting science in the business world, because people like you, people like I, we have theories about these things. They can be tested out by academics. Academics can modify them, throw it back, but there's not this toing and froing, and as you say, there's very little science. I mean, I have an innovation model which I use for measuring innovation. It's never been properly tested. The theory is fine, but I'd love to give it a go. But is there a way of getting? If we could get some of our institutions a bit more involved, because the businesses haven't got time to do it or do it all, but they would be a very useful part in actually gathering some of this knowledge, creating models, whatever.
Yeah, and I think so. What you've got there, Derek, is a challenge to the UK government to shake up the university or the academic world. I think so we've shown we've had people that have played our games, who have done Harvard MBAs and come through with flying colours of Harvard MBAs and played our game. Went, wow, every Harvard MBA student needs to play this at the beginning of their MBA and at the end of it. And we've got lots of people. Edinburgh University loved it, bought a license for it. And we've spoken to lots and lots of other universities as well, who are interested in using our game. But generally speaking, there are two problems with them using our games. The first one is it's not invented here. So there's a pride issue. Okay, that's the first one. The second one is, and also I think they find it quite threatening because it is very like real life, which is quite alien to them because it's tough. It's really tough. This is not sort of sitting behind a desk playing with a computer. You have to learn really fast about how you deal with complexities, just like the real business world. The second reason as well is that we're not giving them money. And that's the point here, is that academics are charged with getting effectively citations and being paid to do research. And that's how the system works. And so on the basis of that, you have to question every bit of academic work that comes out, any bit of research. Before I start reading it or after I've read it, I look at it very closely and say, who was paying the author? Because if the author was being paid by, if you go and look at anti-climate science, then and the author has been paid by oil and gas, does that invalidate the science? Or because the zeitgeist is pro climate change at the moment, all the work that's being carried out for climate change and supporting climate change, there seems to be a lot of it, which is fine, but who's paying for it? And I think this is a really important point, is I think that there is one of the things that we are lacking these days, and sorry, I'm a bit of a ramble here. So I was speaking to my two teenage daughters about this precise point yesterday, is that if Google and our world serves us more of what we want to see, how do you get a real good look at the independence of or verify the independence of the information that you're getting? And that's through media channels or through Google, or indeed the science that's being sent out there. Before I make any scientific claims, and I also always reference what I do, I read a whole lot of scientific papers so that I understand that there is a body of evidence rather than single use case science. And I think there's an awful lot of very poor science. Going back to the business question, I think there's an awful lot of very poor science that is presented in business as being fact. And I'm just looking at it going, wow, that's pretty amazing that you want to run your organization based on that science.
Well, yeah, and what with COVID, etc., we've entered the world where more and more where research is watching a YouTube video.
Yeah.
And it's not just COVID. I mean, that's the worst example, but lots of stuff. All YouTube is YouTube is great. We're going to be on YouTube later on when this stream finishes. I'm not sure whether that's scientific or not, but yeah, we are, and yeah, people can make up their own mind what they see. But when facts are presented with no references, no checking, people say, I saw it on YouTube. It's the modern equivalent, isn't it? Of I spoke to a man down the pub.
I love Ricky Gervais on this, which he said the reason why he loves facts so much. I can't remember the exact words, so please, I'll have to give my apologies here. But the reason why he loves facts so much is that opinions will come and go, but facts will remain. And the problem is that a lot of people out there believe that opinions are facts, and they're not. They simply are not. But actually, if you can look at media organizations, you look at the pejorative way that a lot of stuff is written and presented to us these days, it's very, very difficult to differentiate. So, for example, the BBC reported that because of climate change, there are more fires in the world. It's bollocks. It's just not. It's just not the truth. And I'm going, okay. Well, I'm going to go and look that up. And so I looked it up and I did my own research on it and found out that wasn't really quite true what they said. But it's an opinion presented as a fact.
Now, there's that wonderful, I can't remember the name of the website. There's that wonderful website where you can look up pairs of facts, and it's causation versus correlation.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And you find out that things like suicide rates are linked to the amount of cottage cheese that's eaten or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. And the amount of time you comb your hair gives you more chance of having a heart attack. Yeah, no, I think it's just absurd, isn't it? By the way, incidentally, I've just released a game called Go Green. Incidentally, I'm very, very keen on sustainability and for us all being respectful of our environments. I just questioned. It's important that I make the point that I'm just questioning all the evidence and everything that comes through to me. And I think that one of the challenges, going back to your point about preparing kids, is getting them to think very carefully about the sources of data and trying to differentiate between opinions and facts. And I think it's difficult.
I don't know if there is a way of doing this. You'll know better than I. But what would happen if there was such a thing as a simulation for kids? I don't know what they would be doing, but you could feed in different types of media streams into it. So they themselves could see what would happen if you fed in false facts or different types of Twitter streams or Instagram feeds or something, just that they could would that not get them to think, wow, we really must think about the stuff we're taking in?
Yeah, I think our game does that.
Good. Excellent.
So yeah, no, and we played it with sort of 16, 17-year-olds, but yeah, absolutely. We have news streams to deal with that precisely. I mean, our tagline these days is sometimes you win, every time you learn. And it's not about beating our game. It's about learning about how you deal with these complex things. So what we're trying to do is take people on a journey from the beginning, which is taking them from a sort of chaotic business, if you like, through stages of business maturity. So from chaos through reactive, active, and then optimized. And so we're taking on this journey, but they're taking themselves on it. But I think the sort of optimized is what I'd call an agile business. It's an organization that's able to respond quickly to the outside stimuli. But there again, which stimuli are correct and which aren't, and that requires a thoughtful approach to how you go about addressing finding out what is important, what isn't. And so a lot of the media, the news articles that we are feeding into people during the game, a lot of it's just nonsense, because a lot of it is. And you're sort of, people are looking at it going, does this apply to me or does it not? And just like any other director of an organization, or any employee of an organization, there's no idea. If you take the situation in Ukraine right now, will it kick off? Won't it? Your guess is as good as mine.
Well, yeah, indeed. The question is, do you take the red pill or the blue pill before you play your game? Or is that a choice? Is that a choice you make? But yeah, it's ridiculous though, isn't it? I mean, my wife likes to have a look at the Daily Mail. There's no hope for her, but that's an interesting example of itself, because you have a paper supposedly called a paper with a website. It's supposed to have a certain political bias, certain political leanings, but if you go through all the articles, there's everything on there. The articles that support the government don't support the government. They're in favor of climate change. They're not in favor of climate change. How are people supposed to make sense of it all?
Well, I think increasingly, I think so first of all, I should just put up my hand and just say that I stopped watching and reading the news actively. Passively, I should say, in 2007, and I haven't watched it since, because there are so many superlatives and so much misinformation, and no efforts to really correct it or educate people appropriately or give people a balanced opinion. I just gave up on it because it was too difficult. So what I tend to do now is actually I use this thing called Society to filter it for me. So I tend to get the big bits of news, pass it, osmotically, if you like, through people telling me bits and bobs. And if I think that it's got merit, then I'll go and actually investigate it online by looking at multiple news sources. And I try and use the so-called less politicized news sources as well. But I think it's really difficult. And I think that in this age where we live in this, I call it the 160 character society. How can you get a nuanced argument across to somebody in 160 characters? Look at the Ukrainian situation. It's really, really complicated. It's got to do with people's feelings, like Vladimir Putin. It's got to do with his sense of pride. It's got to do with how the West has treated him over the last 30 years. It's also got to do with his belligerence. It's also got to do with the geopolitical structures within Eastern Europe, and how each of the Eastern European nations is behaving, and their relationships with NATO as well. How do you get all that into 160 characters? The answer is you don't. And whilst you can't, it's almost impossible for, I've been arguing for a long time, I think it's almost impossible to lead in a society like that, because you've got to try, the point of a leader, and the reason why we pay people to go to Parliament, is to solve these really complicated things and spend all day, every day figuring it out. But then we expect them to report back in 160 characters. It's nonsense. It's never going to work.
And I think sometimes the politicians are also trying to put forward their arguments in 160 characters as well.
Yeah, you can't. Why do you do a trade deal with, I don't know, Kazakhstan versus Canada, or vice versa? A trade deal is going to run to hundreds of pages, and it'll be based on a balanced outlook. But you can't get that into 4 sentences.
Or if you're Liz Truss, if it involves cheese, probably.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
That'll seal the deal.
That's
but
right.
Yeah, that's that. But that is the problem. It's everybody's chucking forward these 160 character messages, and that's it. It's
and you can probably get an opinion across in those things, but because it's in 160 characters, it must be a fact, surely.
Yeah, well, as people have said for years, there's two parts of any communication. There's the message and there's the meaning, and you need to know the meaning. I used to give the example of, well, if I went home and said to my wife, "Fetch me my slippers," that means I'd really like my slippers, but there's all sorts of behind it. If somebody else goes to my wife, "Fetch me my slippers," they get a smack round the face.
Yeah.
And it's those nuances that we're missing completely in this this, I don't know, digital age, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's very challenging, and I think that there is You know, but in many respects, I think it's very good because it's making us all rethink. And you know, one thing that's very clear to me, I think, uh, which I think is interesting by you know, Banks of England and chancellors of the Exchequer as well, is that they've been so scared to let anybody fall during these big financial crashes and COVID and so on, because no one has failed. There hasn't been a renewal within the economies. And so I think that we've got this situation is because everyone's so frightened about that 160 characters coming out negatively. We've got a situation where we're keeping dead wood in our economies. And I think whilst that continues as a generalized policy within certainly I can speak for the UK, whilst that continues as a policy by politicians to keep dead wood in our economy from a business point of view, then I think that the problem that we're going to have is that we're going to continue to have a flatline productivity because you're just not going to create the breeding ground for true innovation in the future.
Ah, that word, innovation. If only. In fact, that's where all this started, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The talk of innovation. So we all ought to come and play your games.
Well, of course you should. Absolutely.
Indeed, and I have a nicely prepared caption here, which will flash up just now, just in case anybody wants to see what it's all about. There's your website, there's your Twitter handle, and rather than have it all across the front of the screen, I worked out quite nicely. If you search for GingrTech on Facebook and LinkedIn, you'll find your company pages there. So if anybody wants to find out about what Tim's up to or wants to find out about how to play, then those are the places to go.
Thanks very much for that, Derek. Appreciate it.
So it's amazing, the technology, isn't it?
It is.
Facts you can rely on online.
Yeah, that's right. Stuff you can absolutely agree that they are there.
And well, they were supplied by you, so they better be right, haven't they?
Well, let's hope so. Yeah. So it was interesting actually. I was watching one of the Royal Institution lectures, not the Christmas lectures, but there was one just before Christmas on the RI channel, which all about how our brains basically are just playing a hallucination forever. And so we're hallucinating through reality every day. And you can check that out because, you know, you go and ask 20 people what happened after they've all witnessed the same accident. You can ask them all the same, you know, what they've seen, and you're going to get 20 different answers. But it's absolutely fascinating that how little we are actually able to change this sort of playing hallucination of reality that's going on in our heads and interrupt it.
Yeah, and it's tied. That's all tied in with the fact that according to the neuroscientists, our brains can't tell the difference between whether stuff is real or not.
Yeah.
So,
and I think this is the point that just going back to the previous point there is that, you know, if you've you know, if those fires are burning in Greece on a 60-inch screen with 4K definition in your front room, they seem pretty real.
they do indeed. They do indeed.
But again, that's opinion rather than fact. You know, it's a representation. It's not happening in your back garden. I saw, you know, I'm a very big fan of Stephen Fry, and he's I saw him in an interview recently talking about empiricism. You know, what can you see around you that's changed? You know, do you see these things happening? And I think that I've become a bit more of an empiricist as I've got a bit older, and saying, you know, okay, well, all these scare stories, all these stories that are coming in via media channels are all great. However, what do I actually see? You know, what's the difference I can see in the 200 or 300 people that I see on any regular basis? And the answer is not very much.
Well, on that basis, the realizing that you're an empiricist cynicist, I think is a good way of putting it.
Yeah, that's probably true.
But yes, it's a bit like me. I just asked the question why to try and drill to the bottom of it and see what's really happening. So on that note, it's very near the end of time. So It's been interesting. We've gone places that I didn't even know we were going to. So
Neither did I.
but yes, we've covered simulation. We've covered it. We've covered all sorts of things. So hopefully, the people that have been watching will find something useful in that. The replay will be available next week, and I'll be chopping this up into bite-sized chunks for people to get hold of. So, thank you, Tim, for appearing this week, and for those people still there, we'll see you in a fortnight's time when my guest will be Samuel West, who's I'm not sure whether his title is curator or CEO of the Museum of Failure. So that should be a real blast. So I'll see you again in a fortnight's time.